My name is Yusuf Khan. If you had known me a few years ago, you would have seen a man of unwavering faith, a respected imam, someone who dedicated his life to serving Allah and guiding his community with absolute devotion. Born in Iraq, I grew up in a home where religion was not just an aspect of life, it was its very essence. My father and grandfather were religious leaders, and I followed the same path without hesitation. When war and instability forced us to leave our homeland, we found refuge in the United States, where I took on a new mission, shepherding a Muslim community and keeping our spiritual identity alive in a foreign land. For years, I taught, advised, and defended my faith with the absolute certainty that my life was in Allah's hands. But certainty has a cruel way of unraveling when reality confronts us unexpectedly. I had never doubted, never questioned, and always believed that if I remained faithful, I would find peace at the moment of my death. But nothing could have prepared me for what was to come. Nothing could have made me imagine that I, a man whose life was dedicated to Allah, would have my faith brutally torn apart. It was a diagnosis that changed everything. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. I had already visited the faithful in hospitals, held their hands as they faced death, recited prayers for those exhaling their last breath. But nothing prepared me to hear those words directed at me. At first, I accepted it with resignation, believing it was merely a test of faith. After all, how many times had I myself told the faithful that everything was in Allah's plan? I continued my prayers, maintaining my routine of sacred rituals, seeking comfort in the words of the Quran. But the disease did not care about my faith. My body withered, the pain intensified, and the treatment seemed nothing more than a futile battle against the inevitable. I convinced myself that everything was part of a divine plan, but secretly, I began to feel something new, fear. Not fear of death itself, for I had always taught that death was merely a passage to eternal life. What terrified me was the possibility that I might not be ready. Had I been good enough? Would Allah truly welcome me? Until one night, which seemed like any other, my body gave out. The last thing I remember was the panic in Fatima's eyes, my wife's, as my vision faded and the sound of the adhan echoed in my mind. The sensation was abrupt. One moment I was there, feeling the weight of the disease pulling me into unconsciousness, and the next, I was floating, as if I had been ripped from my own body. At first, I thought I was dreaming, perhaps a side effect of the medication. But then I saw my body. It lay there, motionless on the hospital bed, surrounded by doctors and nurses racing against time. My wife wept beside me, her hands trembling as she held mine, trying to call me back. I wanted to speak, to tell her that I was all right, but my voice would not come. It was at that moment that I realized something disturbing. I felt no pain. The exhaustion, the weakness that had become part of me in recent months, had vanished. In its place was only a deep, almost numbing calm. I should have been terrified, yet everything seemed so natural, as if I had always known somehow that this would happen. Time seemed to distort. Sounds grew muffled, and then a light began to emerge. It was not an ordinary light, like that of a lamp or the sun. It was something more, something alive, pulsating, calling out to me. The light enveloped me with an indescribable warmth, a sensation that transcended anything I had ever felt in life. It was not just physical warmth. It was a presence, an embrace. In that moment, I was absolutely certain I was being received into paradise. After all, I had always taught that those who remained faithful would be welcomed with mercy. I surrendered completely, allowing that light to carry me wherever it would. The glow grew, enveloping everything around me, until the hospital disappeared. But then, suddenly and brutally, the peace dissipated. The welcoming warmth gave way to a biting cold, and the glow began to fracture, like shattered glass. My heart clenched in a way I had never experienced before. What was happening? Something was wrong. The light started to recede, dissolving into the darkness that now surrounded me. It was then that I heard the screams, They came from all directions, a chorus of despair tearing through the silence. And in the midst of those laments, I recognized a voice. My blood ran cold. It was my mother, the same tone I remembered from my childhood, but laden with inhuman anguish. She cried out for mercy. But for whom? Terror seized me. My mother! How could it be her? My mother had always been a devout, pious woman, someone who taught me to love and fear Allah from childhood. I refused to believe what I was hearing, but the screams did not cease. They were everywhere, filling that void with a pain that transcended anything human. I tried to run toward her voice, but I realized there was no ground beneath my feet, no direction to follow. I was simply floating, trapped in that abyss of darkness and wailing. Despair began to seep into me like poison. Why was this happening? Why, after a lifetime of faith, was I surrounded by suffering? Everything inside me screamed to recite the Quran, to cling to the sacred words that had always brought me security. But when I tried to invoke the passages I had memorized, my mind became empty. The words simply would not come. It was as if something was preventing me, stripping away even the one thing I had always carried with me, my faith. It was at that moment that I saw the figure in the center of the darkness. At first, I could not recognize it. It was chained, kneeling, with its head bowed as if bearing an unbearable weight upon its shoulders. Enormous rusted chains bound it to the ground, snaking around it like dead roots. Then, it lifted its head. My heart stopped. It was Muhammad, the prophet. I recognized him instantly, not by the descriptions we had heard, but because something inside me knew it was him. Yet what I saw was not the noble, serene countenance I had always imagined. His eyes carried an infinite sadness, a pain that seemed deeper than any earthly punishment. In that instant, everything within me shattered. Why was he there? What did it mean? I wanted to ask, to understand, but before I could react, a voice echoed through the void. It was not an ordinary voice. It was like thunder piercing my soul, a sound that was not only heard but felt in every part of my being. The question was simple, yet it struck me like a blow. Who is Allah? Do you really know who He is? My mind collapsed. Who was Allah? What did that mean? I had spent my entire life teaching about Him, preaching His word, defending His sovereignty. Yet in that moment, before that overwhelming presence, my certainty wavered. Wanted to respond, to proclaim that Allah was the one true God, that I had dedicated every breath of my existence to Him. But something held me back. Something within me hesitated, as if, somehow, I already knew that any answer I gave would be insufficient. Before I could find the words, a new vision formed before me. The Quran appeared in the air, its pages opening on their own, turning at an impossible speed, until they began to project images as if they were windows into the past. I held my breath as I watched. It was the Kaaba. But not the Kaaba as we know it today. It was surrounded by idols. Men dressed in ancient robes were revering them, bowing before statues that seemed to belong to a cult forgotten by time. Then, I saw something that sent shivers down my spine. The name Allah, carved into a stone long before the birth of Islam. The scene shifted again, and I saw ancient civilizations uttering that name long before Muhammad existed. My mind refused to accept what I was seeing. This was not possible. Allah had always been unique, eternal, set apart from any other belief. But the images continued, revealing connections I had never considered. Symbols that harked back to ancient pagan traditions, sacred words intermingled with rituals I would never associate with the faith I had followed all my life. I wanted to look away, to deny it all, but I could not. The voice echoed again, slicing through my soul like a sharp blade. Who is Allah? This time, the question sounded different, as if it were not just a doubt, but an accusation. And for the first time in my life, I did not know the answer. My chest tightened with a terror I had never experienced before. Everything I thought I knew was collapsing. It was then that I realized I was falling. The darkness around me opened into an endless abyss, and I was pulled into it. Despair overtook me. I tried to fight, to cling to anything, but there was nothing, only a void consuming me. I was falling, not like in a dream, where the fall seems eternal until you wake up. This was real. I felt the air being ripped from my chest, the cold slicing through my skin, the panic growing with every moment. But the most terrifying thing was not the fall itself. It was the feeling that I was being torn away from everything I knew, from everything I believed. The images I had seen burned in my mind like live embers. I wanted to forget, to erase it from my memory, but the truth had been planted within me like a seed, impossible to eradicate. And then, just as I thought I would be consumed by the abyss, everything stopped. The silence was deafening. I opened my eyes and realized I was no longer falling. I was kneeling in the midst of darkness, trembling, my breathing irregular. And then I saw something I did not expect. Before me, standing and watching me with an expression of deep compassion and firmness, was a man. He did not say a word, but his eyes carried an authority I had never witnessed before. I did not need to ask who he was. I already knew. My heart began pounding violently in my chest. I wanted to look away, to avert my gaze, but something inside me forced me to face him. This man was unlike anyone I had ever seen. His countenance was serene, yet his presence was overwhelming, as if all of existence revolved around him. I could not move. I could not even breathe properly. Then, like a distant echo, Padre John's words returned to my mind. "Did you see Jesus?" A shiver ran down my spine. No, it couldn't be. That went against everything I had ever taught, against everything I had ever believed. Yet, at the same time, something within me screamed that yes, it was him. And it was at that moment that the voice echoed again, but this time it came not from outside, but from within me. "I am the way, the truth, and the life." The words thundered in my soul, and in that moment, all the resistance within me broke. I realized I could no longer deny it. My entire life, I had sought the truth, and now, there before him, I had finally found it. A wave of emotions hit me powerfully: fear, confusion, relief, reverence. It was as if everything inside me was collapsing and being reborn at the same time. I wanted to speak, to ask, to understand, but my mouth would not move. I just remained there, paralyzed, before him. And then, without him uttering a single word, I understood. It was not a logical explanation, nor a revelation as I had imagined. It was a silent certainty, as if the truth were being imprinted directly onto my soul. I saw flashes of my own life, every prayer, every sermon, every moment in which I defended my faith without ever questioning it. But now everything seemed different. I could no longer look at my old belief the same way. How had I never seen this before? How had I spent my entire existence so sure of something without realizing what was right in front of me? The words of the Quran, which I had recited since childhood, echoed in my mind, but now they seemed empty. It was as if I had been holding onto the wrong map all this time, convinced that it would lead me to the right destination. And now, finally, I had found the true way. The light around him began to shine with greater intensity, enveloping everything in an indescribable clarity. And then, like a gust of wind, everything disappeared. I suddenly opened my eyes, back in the hospital. The sound of machines filled the room, and my wife held my hand tightly, tears streaming down her face. I was alive, but something inside me had died. Or rather, something within me had been reborn. I wanted to cry, to scream, to tell someone what I had just experienced. But how? How do you explain that everything I had preached for decades now seemed like a shadow before the truth I had witnessed? In the days that followed, I tried to resume my routine, but nothing made sense. The prayers that once flowed from my lips now seemed like empty words. The mosque I once called home felt like a strange place. And the worst part was the silence. I could not tell anyone. I knew what happened to those who questioned. My community, my family, everything I had built, everything was at risk. But one thing was certain. I could no longer live a lie. In the days and weeks that followed, the battle within me intensified. What should I do? How could I continue living as an imam when my faith had been irreversibly shaken? I avoided the mosque, spending sleepless nights trying to understand what had happened to me. The vision would not leave my mind, the chained prophet, the thundering voice questioning my belief, the revelation about Allah, and above all, that presence, Jesus. He needed no convincing. His mere presence before me was the truth, but accepting that meant destroying my life. I knew what happened to those who questioned Islam, even more so to those who abandoned it. My wife noticed my change, but I did not have the courage to tell her. Even my children seemed to sense that something was wrong. And then, the decision came. I could no longer ignore it. I went to my oncologist, Dr. Thompson, a Christian woman who had always looked upon my faith with compassion and curiosity. For the first time, I confessed to someone what I had seen. She did not react with shock or disbelief. She simply smiled slightly and said, "Perhaps you have received an invitation." Those words echoed in my mind. The invitation. Yes, that was exactly it. But was I ready to accept it? For months, I fought against the idea, but the truth is, the seed had already been planted. Gradually, I began reading the New Testament in secret. Every page seemed to speak directly to my heart. Jesus was not just a prophet, as I had always believed. He was the Savior, the only way. I then knew that my choice was made. The day of my baptism was discreet, far from the eyes of my community, but inside me it was as if an explosion of light had burst forth, dispelling all the darkness I had carried. When the water touched my skin, an indescribable peace filled me. Not like the light that had deceived me at the beginning of my experience, but a true peace that could not be taken away from me. Emerging from the water, I felt that I was finally alive. Yes, I would lose my position. Yes, I would face rejection. But for the first time, I knew I was on the right path. I had found the truth, and the truth had set me free.